It was still early when the first light touched the windows of the small apartment. The alarm went off at 6, just as it always did. He reached for it and turned it off before it could ring a second time. His days always started like this, calm, quiet, and predictable. He liked it that way. The coffee machine clicked on automatically, filling the kitchen with that strong smell that meant another long day at work. He was an FBI agent, and after 15 years of service, he had learned to appreciate small moments of peace before facing the chaos that often waited outside. He looked around the room, tidy and organized. The walls were covered with framed certificates and a few photos, none of them for show but for memories. In one picture, he was shaking hands with his director after solving a difficult case years ago. That photo always reminded him of why he joined in the first place, to serve with honesty and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. He left for work just before 7. The city was waking up, cars filling the streets, people hurrying to offices and schools. He liked to drive in silence, using those 30 minutes to think. The last few months had been strange. Something felt off in the office. Files had been moved. Conversation stopped when he walked into the room, and a few colleagues had begun acting distant. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just stress from the high-profile case they were all working on. But deep down, he sensed something bigger was brewing. The FBI headquarters was as busy as ever. Agents rushed between offices. The sound of phones ringing and keyboards clicking filled the air. When he entered, a few heads turned his way. Normally, he'd get a wave or a small smile, but that morning, there was silence. He didn't think much of it and went straight to his desk. Minutes later, his supervisor appeared at his door. The expression on his face was serious, too serious for an ordinary morning. "Can we talk?" the supervisor said quietly. He followed him to a small conference room. Inside were 2 men from the Internal Affairs Department. They didn't smile, didn't greet him, just sat down and opened a file on the table. He sat across from them, trying to stay calm. One of them looked up and said, "We need to ask you some questions regarding the classified files that went missing last week." He frowned, confused. "Of course. I heard about that. Do you think I might have information that could help?" The man closed the folder. "Actually, the evidence we've reviewed points to your credentials being used to access those files." For a few seconds, the words didn't make sense. He blinked slowly, trying to process what he'd just heard. "My credentials?" "That's impossible. I haven't accessed any classified files outside my assigned cases." The second investigator leaned forward. "The logins came from your workstation. The timestamps match your office hours, and there are transactions linked to an offshore account in your name." He froze. His throat went dry. "That's not true," he said firmly. "I don't have any offshore account. Someone must have—" "We're not making accusations yet," the first man interrupted. "But until we sort this out, you'll be placed on temporary suspension." The supervisor looked down, avoiding his eyes. That hurt more than the accusation itself. He stood up slowly, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're saying I'm under investigation?" The man nodded. "Yes, please hand over your badge and firearm for now. You'll be notified when we need to speak again." For a moment, he just stood there, unable to move. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Handing over his badge felt like tearing off a piece of himself. He had carried it with pride for years, through danger and long nights, through missions that pushed him to his limits, and now he was being treated like a criminal. When he walked out, every eye in the hallway seemed to follow him. Whispers started immediately. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew what they were saying. Accused, suspended, guilty. He walked straight to the parking lot without looking back. The drive home felt endless. His hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. He kept replaying the conversation in his mind, trying to understand how such a mistake could happen. He knew he hadn't done anything wrong. Someone had to be setting him up. But who and why? When he reached his apartment, the silence felt unbearable. He sat on the couch staring at the wall. He thought about calling someone from the office, maybe one of his old friends, but he already knew how that would go. Once an accusation like this was made, everyone pulled back. Nobody wanted to get caught in the middle. He spent the next few hours going through his personal laptop, checking his accounts, his recent activity, anything that could prove his innocence. Everything looked normal. No strange logins, no transfers, no signs of tampering. He opened his work emails, only to find his access already revoked. They had locked him out completely. By evening, the news had spread through the agency. A few messages popped up on his phone. Some were sympathetic, others cautious. One simply said, "I'm sorry this happened." That one hurt the most. It sounded like a goodbye. He sat at the window watching the lights of the city. The people walking below had no idea that for one man, everything was falling apart. He thought about all the years he had given to the job, the long nights, the missed holidays, the times he put himself in danger to protect others. He had done it all because he believed in justice, in truth. And now truth was the only thing that could save him. He knew he couldn't just sit and wait for things to clear up. If someone had framed him, they had done it carefully. That meant it wasn't random. It was personal. He decided then that he would find out who was behind this, no matter what it took. The next morning, he woke early again out of habit. He dressed simply, no badge, no gun. He didn't need them today. He went to a small coffee shop near the agency, a place he used to visit with colleagues before big operations. When he walked in, a few familiar faces turned away. Only one younger agent nodded at him quietly. He sat down with his coffee, feeling the weight of eyes on his back. He overheard two agents at another table whispering. One said, "I can't believe it was him. He always seemed so by the book." The other replied, "That's what they all say. You never really know anyone." He took a deep breath and reminded himself not to react. Let them talk. The truth would come out. Later that day, he called an old friend from another department, someone he trusted completely. The man had once worked in cyber analysis before retiring. "I need your help," he said over the phone. "Something's not right with the evidence against me." His friend agreed to meet the next evening. "I'll bring my laptop," the friend said. "Let's see what we can find." For the first time since the suspension, he felt a small sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to fight this. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about who could have done it. He remembered how a few weeks earlier, one of the senior officers had warned him not to dig too deep into the stolen files case. "You're stepping on toes," the man had said. At the time, he thought it was just frustration talking. But now, those words echoed differently. Maybe he had stumbled onto something he wasn't supposed to see. Maybe that was why someone had decided to remove him. He thought back to his last case, the one involving a hidden group trading government data through encrypted networks. They were sophisticated, almost untouchable. He had been getting close, following digital trails that led uncomfortably near to internal systems. Then suddenly, the case had been reassigned without explanation. And now, he was being accused of the exact kind of breach he had been investigating. It all fit too well. The following evening, his friend arrived with a laptop and a quiet determination. They spent hours examining copies of his old reports, timestamps, and digital footprints. Something strange caught their attention, a small detail in the access logs. The login that supposedly came from his workstation had an IP address that didn't match the agency's internal network. It was close but slightly off, like someone had mirrored his system remotely. "This isn't you," his friend said. "Someone's using your identity from another terminal. A professional could do this, but it's not easy. They'd need high-level access," he nodded slowly. "So it's someone inside." "Most likely," his friend replied. "And whoever it is, they're covering their tracks well." He leaned back in his chair, the reality sinking in. Someone within the agency had not only stolen files, but also built a perfect trap around him. He wasn't just dealing with an enemy. He was dealing with a ghost inside the system. When his friend left that night, he sat alone again, surrounded by silence. He looked at the badge lying on the table. No longer his, but still a symbol of everything he had believed in. They might have taken it from him, but they couldn't take away his will to fight. He made a silent promise to himself. He would clear his name, even if he had to expose the people hiding in the shadows of his own agency. He didn't know how deep the betrayal went, but he was ready to find out. Outside, the city lights flickered against the dark sky. He watched them until the early hours, determined and unafraid. Tomorrow would be another day, and he would be ready to start uncovering the truth that someone had worked so hard to bury. Days passed, but the silence from the agency felt louder with each one. The suspension had stripped him not just of his badge, but also of his sense of purpose. He spent most of his time inside, staring at files and notes scattered across his table. He was looking for anything that could make sense of the mess. Every time he replayed what had happened, it felt unreal. One morning, he was a respected agent. The next, he was being called a traitor. But he wasn't ready to give up. The small clue his friend had found about the mirrored system gave him hope. Someone had accessed his credentials from another terminal, using a network that almost matched the FBI's internal line. That meant it wasn't an outsider. It was someone who knew how to move inside their systems without leaving obvious traces. He started revisiting old memories from the last few months at work, trying to remember if anything had seemed off. There was that one time when his computer froze suddenly during a briefing. He thought it was just a technical glitch. Then there was the day someone from IT came to update his system without warning. They said it was a routine check. Maybe it wasn't. He remembered the older man who handled most of the agency's system updates after retirement. He had come back recently for consulting work. People said he was brilliant but hard to work with, and he preferred being alone in the tech room. That detail stayed in his mind like a small spark waiting to catch fire. If anyone could manipulate internal systems unnoticed, it would be someone like that. But he needed proof. Just a hunch wouldn't help. If he confronted the agency with guesses, they would call it an excuse. He needed something solid, something no one could ignore. That evening, his friend came over again carrying his laptop. "I looked deeper into your case," he said quietly, setting up on the table. "I think whoever did this used a tunnel, like a hidden bridge between two systems. That's how they could make it look like you were the one accessing the files." He leaned forward. "Can we trace it?" "Maybe," his friend replied. "But we'll need to access the old backup logs from inside the building. Those files aren't online. They're stored on internal servers. That was a problem." He didn't have clearance anymore. He couldn't even step inside the office, let alone touch the system. But there might be another way. His friend still had a contact who worked as a digital archivist. If they could convince him to share the backup logs quietly, they might find the proof they needed. 2 nights later, they met in a small diner on the edge of town. The contact, a quiet man with tired eyes, looked nervous as he slid a small flash drive across the table. "I shouldn't be doing this," he whispered. "If they find out, they won't," his friend said. "We just need to look, that's all." The man nodded and left quickly, not waiting for thanks. They took the drive home and plugged it into the laptop. The files were heavy, years of encrypted data. It took hours just to unpack them, and the room was filled with the low hum of the computer as they waited. When the results finally appeared, his heart raced. There it was, a record of a remote access link created months earlier, registered under a temporary admin account. The signature looked familiar. His friend pointed at the code. "This line here, it's old. This kind of system tag was used by the tech department years ago. Hardly anyone knows how to use it now." He stared at the screen. Except for that retired systems engineer. They both went silent for a moment. It was a risky theory, but it fit perfectly. The retired engineer had been around the same time his system started acting strange. He had the knowledge and the clearance to slip in unnoticed. And if he was involved in the stolen data case, framing someone else would be the perfect distraction. The more he thought about it, the more sense it made. He had been getting too close to the stolen files investigation before all this happened. Maybe he was never meant to find the truth. Maybe that was why someone wanted him out of the way. The next few days became a blur of searching, comparing logs and piecing together small clues. He barely slept, driven by the thought that he was one step closer to clearing his name. But the closer he got, the more cautious he became. If the person who framed him realized he was digging around, they might act again, and this time he might not get a second chance. He started noticing strange things around his apartment. A car parked near his building for hours, the same car showing up again the next day. His phone would click faintly before calls. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks, or maybe he was being watched. He knew too well how the system worked. Surveillance wasn't always visible, but it was always there when someone wanted to keep tabs on you. He decided to lay low. He used public Wi-Fi to send messages, avoided his usual routes, and kept his research offline. Every day, he discovered a little more about how carefully the trap had been set. Whoever did it had used cloned security tokens, falsified signatures, and planted fake payments under his identity. It was a master plan, designed to make him look guilty beyond question. Then one evening, his friend called with urgency in his voice. "I found something big," he said. "Meet me in an hour." They met in a quiet parking lot. His friend opened his laptop and showed him a document, an email from months ago. It was a request to access archived files signed under his name. The problem was he had never written it. The signature was digitally forged, but the timestamp matched perfectly with the system update visit months earlier. This was the start of it, his friend explained. They created this request so they could pull the files, then planted them back later under your profile. He exhaled slowly, his stomach tightening. Can you trace where the email was actually sent from? I can try, his friend said. After a few minutes of running scripts, he found a line of code hidden inside the header. Here, he pointed, the original sender was a local server. That means the person was inside the building when they did it. That confirmed it. The person who had framed him wasn't some outsider hacking from afar. It was someone with a desk and a badge inside those same walls. The next day, he decided to go near the agency. He couldn't go inside, but he could observe. He stood across the street watching people come and go. He saw familiar faces, agents he'd worked with for years. Some looked his way, quickly turning their heads. He felt like a ghost, present but invisible. Then he saw the older engineer walking through security, holding a tablet under his arm. The sight stirred something inside him. There was no proof yet, but his instincts screamed that this man was the key. He returned home more determined than ever. If the engineer was behind it, he had to find a way to expose him without breaking any laws. His friend suggested using a data mirror, a system that could record real-time network movements without alerting anyone. It was risky but possible. If they could catch the same remote pattern that had been used before, it would be undeniable evidence. They set up the system using public nodes and waited. For days, nothing happened. He was starting to lose hope again when one night the tracker blinked alive. The same old access bridge was back online. Someone was connecting remotely into the FBI system. He leaned forward, heart pounding. The signal jumped from one point to another, tracing across the city before stopping at a single address, a quiet suburban neighborhood. His friend's face went pale. That's registered to the retired engineer, he whispered. They looked at each other, both knowing what that meant. The man who had ruined his life was still inside the system, moving freely, confident that no one was watching. He didn't sleep that night. He thought about how easily his reputation had been destroyed, how quickly everyone had turned against him, and how one false piece of evidence could erase years of honesty. But he also knew something else. He finally had the direction he needed. He wasn't fighting shadows anymore. He knew who he was after. The next morning he called his supervisor directly. I know I'm not supposed to contact you, he said calmly, but I have something you'll want to see. The supervisor sounded cautious. You're not helping yourself by reaching out. I'm not trying to. I'm trying to help the truth. Check the access logs for last night's system activity. Look at where it leads. There was a long silence on the other end. What are you saying? I'm saying I was set up, and the person you're looking for is inside your building. He hung up before the supervisor could answer. It was a gamble, but it was time for the truth to come out. He had done his part. Now it was up to them to see what was really happening. As he sat by the window, watching the morning light spill over the rooftops, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, a quiet certainty. The storm wasn't over, but the clouds were starting to break. For the first time since this nightmare began, he could see a small path leading toward justice. He didn't know how the agency would react or what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Whoever had thought they could bury the truth was about to be exposed. The morning felt heavier than usual. He woke up before sunrise, his mind already running through everything that had happened. The call to his supervisor from the night before kept replaying in his head. He didn't know if the man had checked the logs yet, or if he had ignored the warning completely. Either way, he knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. He brewed coffee and sat at the table, staring at the steam curling from the mug. There was a strange calm inside him, the kind that comes when you've done everything you can and now all you can do is wait. But deep down he also knew this was far from over. If the truth really started to come out, the person who framed him wouldn't just sit back and watch. Whoever they were, they had risked everything to pull this off. They wouldn't hesitate to protect themselves now. By mid-morning, his phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. He hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, and familiar. It was the head of internal affairs. We need to speak with you, the voice said. Can you come down to headquarters today? For a moment, he didn't answer. Am I being arrested? He asked. No, the voice replied. Not yet. Just come in. We have some new information. He hung up slowly, his heart pounding. It could be a trap, but it could also mean they had found what he wanted them to see. Either way, he didn't have a choice. He had nothing left to lose. He arrived at the building just before noon. The security guards at the front gave him a cold look as they checked him in. They still saw him as the accused, not as one of their own. The walk through the hallway felt endless. Every step echoed like a memory of how things used to be. Friendly nods, quiet respect, a sense of belonging. Now there was only distance and silence. They led him to the same small conference room where everything had started weeks ago. The same dull lights, the same gray walls. But this time there were more people inside. His supervisor was there, along with 2 investigators and a technician from cyber operations. A large screen was set up on the table showing lines of data scrolling across. "Sit down," the supervisor said quietly. He did. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then one of the investigators cleared his throat. "We checked the access logs you mentioned," he said. "The ones from last night." The room felt colder. The investigator continued. "We found something we can't explain yet. There was a remote connection to the system using your old credentials, except you were not logged in anywhere at the time. The connection came from a private address registered to one of our former system engineers." A flicker of relief passed through him, but he kept his face calm. "So you see now," he said softly, "I wasn't lying." The supervisor looked uneasy. "We haven't drawn any conclusions yet, but this discovery has raised serious questions." The cyber technician leaned forward. The connection was live for almost 20 minutes. "Whoever it was accessed the same classified files that you were accused of stealing. We tracked the IP and it points to a home address in the suburbs." "Have you gone there?" he asked. "Not yet," the investigator said. "We're preparing a warrant. But we wanted to talk to you first," he nodded. "Then you're finally going to see the truth." After the meeting, they told him to stay close to the building in case they needed him. He sat outside the cafeteria watching agents rush past. Some glanced at him curiously, whispering to each other. The rumors were probably spreading again, but this time he didn't care. The truth was moving, slowly but surely, and that was all that mattered. Hours passed before the investigators returned. He could see it in their faces as they walked toward him. Something had happened. The lead investigator sat down across from him and said, "We went to the location. The house was empty, but we found multiple hard drives, 2 servers, and several encrypted devices. The same remote system logs were active until about 15 minutes before we arrived. Someone was monitoring us." His chest tightened. "So he knew you were coming." The investigator nodded grimly. "Looks that way. We think he wiped part of the data before leaving. But we recovered fragments of communication records. Some of them mention your name. They were using your profile as a cover to transfer information out of the system." For a long time, he didn't say anything. A strange mix of relief and anger burned inside him. Relief because his innocence was finally visible. Anger because the person who had destroyed his life had slipped away again, one step ahead. "What happens now?" he asked. "We'll find him," the investigator said. "It's only a matter of time." That night he went home exhausted. His mind wouldn't stop spinning. He thought about how easily the engineer had escaped, how carefully everything had been planned. There was still no guarantee that the agency would publicly clear his name. For now, everything was just under investigation. He needed something more, something that would make the truth undeniable. He sat in the dark, staring at his laptop. Then he remembered the small data mirror his friend had installed to track network traffic. It might still hold a backup of the access route from last night. If the engineer had wiped his own systems, this copy could be the only untouched record left. He called his friend right away. "Do you still have the backup logs?" "I do," his friend said. "Why?" "I need them. Tonight." A few hours later, they met again in the quiet of his apartment. The friend opened the laptop and loaded the files. The data bridge appeared on the screen like a glowing line, clear, untouched. They followed it step by step, tracing the digital route the intruder had taken. "There," his friend said, pointing. "He used a hidden gateway that only someone with old clearance codes could access. This confirms it was the same person who set you up before." "Can we recover his digital signature?" he asked. "It'll take time, but yes. The system always leaves a faint trace even after wiping. I can isolate it." Hours turned into dawn as they worked side by side. Finally, his friend froze and whispered, "Got it." He zoomed in on the data. A small string of numbers and letters appeared. the kind of unique identifier that only one user in the agency's system could possess. It matched the retired engineer's old clearance ID. He stared at it for a long time, hardly believing it. This was the proof he needed. Not rumors, not theories, solid, irrefutable proof. His friend leaned back, exhausted but smiling. "You did it," he said. He shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. We need to get this into the right hands before he finds a way to disappear completely." He went straight back to the headquarters that morning. The security guards hesitated when they saw him, but he showed them the printed copy of the data and asked for the internal affairs team. Within minutes, he was back in the conference room. "I told you someone else was behind it," he said, placing the evidence on the table. "This is the trace of his clearance ID. You can verify it yourself." The technician took the file, eyes widening as he scanned the data. "This is legitimate," he said. "It matches the ID of the engineer we're investigating." The supervisor looked at him quietly for a long moment. "You've been through hell," he said finally. "But it looks like you were right all along." He didn't answer. Words felt too small for everything he had been through. The humiliation, the sleepless nights, the endless doubt. He just nodded once and said, "Now you can find him." That afternoon, the agency launched a full manhunt. The engineer's face appeared in the system's alert feed with the label, "Wanted for internal breach and data theft." Every agent across the region was notified. For the first time in weeks, he walked out of the building feeling lighter. The clouds that had hung over him were finally starting to clear. He still didn't know how the agency would handle his suspension, but at least now people were beginning to look at him differently. On his way home, he got a call from his supervisor. "You might want to turn on the news," the man said. He did. The headline made his heart race. "Former FBI systems engineer under investigation for espionage and framing fellow agent." The story was spreading fast. The truth was finally coming out for everyone to see. He turned off the TV and sat in silence. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the exhaustion. The road to clearing his name had nearly broken him, and it wasn't over yet. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet strength returning. He thought about all the people who had doubted him, the ones who had looked away when he needed them most. He wasn't angry anymore. He just understood something new. Trust could be destroyed in a moment, but rebuilding it took time, patience, and proof. And he finally had that proof. As night fell, he stood by the window again, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. Somewhere out there, the man who had framed him was running, hiding from the truth. But sooner or later, justice had a way of catching up. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain. He wasn't the same man who had walked into that office weeks ago. The system had tried to break him, but instead, it had made him stronger. And now he was ready for whatever came next. The next morning began quietly, almost too quietly for what was about to happen. The air around the house felt heavy, as if even the walls knew something important was coming. The sound of cars parking outside broke the stillness. Within minutes, several black SUVs lined up near the curb. Men and women in suits stepped out, moving with calm precision. It was the FBI search team back again, this time for what they called the final evidence collection before the charges against him were to be filed. He had been awake all night, sitting at the edge of his bed, replaying every moment of the past few weeks in his mind. His name had been dragged through the mud. His home had already been searched twice, his computer system seized, his life turned upside down. And yet, despite everything, he had agreed to cooperate fully. He knew that running or hiding would only make him look guilty. The only weapon he had left was truth, and he was determined to use it. When the doorbell rang, he didn't hesitate. He opened it, looked straight at the lead officer, and said calmly, "Come in. You'll find whatever you're looking for." His voice was steady, though his chest was tight. The lead officer nodded respectfully. "You understand, this is protocol. We're doing a final scan of your old workstation and devices." "I understand," he said. "But I have one request." The officer paused. "Go ahead." "I want to be there when you run the search," he said. "Just as an observer." "I won't interfere." The officer looked unsure. Normally, suspects weren't allowed to be present during technical inspections. But something in the man's tone, calm, direct, sincere, made the officer hesitate. After a moment of thought, he agreed. "All right," he said. "You can watch, but you stay behind the line." Inside the office, the agents began setting up their digital tools. They connected laptops, network cables, and small scanners. The hum of the computers filled the room. On one of the large screens, lines of code began to scroll rapidly. Every click of a keyboard echoed like a countdown. The man stood quietly near the corner watching them work. He wasn't nervous anymore. He had gone beyond that. What he felt now was something sharper, a deep focus. He had noticed something strange during the previous search, a faint network signal that didn't belong. It was old, hidden, almost invisible. He hadn't said anything then because he needed to confirm it. But now, as the agents scanned his system again, he looked carefully at every movement on the monitor. Minutes turned into an hour. The agent seemed confident. "So far, it matches the last data set," one of them said. "No new activity." The lead officer nodded and looked over at him. "Looks like this will be quick," he said. But then something flickered on the screen, barely noticeable. A tiny data bridge appeared in the lower corner of the network map. It wasn't part of any recent file. It was an old communication protocol, one that hadn't been used by the FBI for almost a decade. He stepped forward slightly. "Wait," he said quietly. Everyone turned. "You're not supposed to speak during the scan," one of the younger agents reminded him. "I know," he replied. "But look at that connection at the bottom right corner. That bridge shouldn't exist. That's an old protocol. I used to work with it 10 years ago. No one uses it anymore, not unless they're hiding something." The room went still. The lead officer leaned closer to the screen. "Which bridge?" He pointed. "That one, yeah, Comlink 47. That's not part of the new FBI network. It connects to an external access tunnel. It means someone's been linking into my system remotely, probably using an old credential." The tech agents exchanged quick looks. One of them began tracing the signal. The room filled with the sound of rapid typing. The bridge began to unravel on the digital map, each trace revealing more lines of data flowing backward into the system. "This shouldn't be possible," one of the technicians murmured. "It's running under an admin ID that was deactivated years ago." "Whose ID?" the lead officer asked sharply. The technician's fingers paused over the keyboard. "It's registered to an old consultant account, someone who left the bureau around 7 years ago. The name is—" He hesitated. "A retired systems engineer." The man in the corner felt his heartbeat quicken. That name wasn't new to him. He had seen it before, in an old file from his cybercrime case. The retired engineer had once been a respected figure in the bureau, but after retirement he was quietly brought back as a technical consultant for classified projects. The lead officer frowned. "Are you telling me this person has remote access to an agent's system?" "It looks that way," the technician replied. "And the access was active less than 24 hours ago." The room erupted into whispers. Suddenly, the story that had painted him as the criminal began to crumble right in front of their eyes. The lead officer straightened up and looked at him. "You said earlier you were being set up. Did you know it was this person?" He shook his head slowly. "Not for sure, but I suspected someone inside the system was doing it. That's why I wanted to be here today. I needed you to see this for yourself." The officer gave a short nod and turned to his team. "Trace the route. I want to know where that connection ends." The air in the room grew tense. The technicians worked quickly, following the digital trail as it wound through several rerouted servers. Each hop made it clearer. The access wasn't random. It had been carefully built to mimic his credentials. After about 20 minutes, the tracing software beeped. A new window opened on the main screen, showing the origin of the connection. It was a home server, registered to the retired engineer's residence. No one spoke for a moment. The officers stared at the address, then at each other, then finally at him. The silence was thick. One of the younger agents exhaled and said quietly, "This changes everything." The lead officer finally broke the silence. "All right," he said firmly. "We're going to verify this. Nobody leaves this room until we confirm it." Another team was immediately dispatched to the engineer's location. The minutes dragged on. The man waited quietly, trying to steady his breathing. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. An hour later, the radio on the desk buzzed. The field team's voice came through, calm but serious. "We've secured the location. The suspect's servers are active. We're finding data that matches the leak, and there are remote logs showing evidence planted on Agent D's systems." The officer turned toward him, his expression softening. "It's true," he said. "You were framed." The man didn't move. He just closed his eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over him. His throat tightened, but he didn't speak. The officers in the room were speechless. A few stepped back, their faces showing quiet regret. For weeks they had looked at him like a traitor. Now they realized he had been fighting to prove his innocence all along. Within hours, the retired engineer was taken into custody. The digital forensics confirmed everything: the access logs, the false trails, the planted drive hidden in the wall vent. Every piece of so-called evidence against him had been fabricated. The true culprit had been using old clearance access to divert suspicion while selling sensitive data to outsiders. By evening, the man was officially cleared of all charges. His suspension was lifted immediately. The director himself called to apologize, though the words felt small compared to what he had endured. Later that night, when the agents finally left his home, he sat alone in the same chair where he had waited that morning. The silence felt different now, lighter, but still heavy with everything that had happened. He thought about how quickly trust can be broken, how a single false accusation can erase years of loyalty and service. He also thought about the few people who had quietly believed in him, who hadn't turned their backs completely. As he looked around the room, he noticed the faint glow of his computer screen still on. The same system that had been used to destroy his life had also become the one that saved it. He stood, closed the laptop, and whispered to himself, "The truth always finds a way." Outside, the night was calm. The street was empty now, only the sound of distant cars echoing faintly. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. There would be hearings, reports, media coverage. But for the first time in a long while, he could breathe again. When he walked to the window, he saw his reflection staring back at him. Tired eyes, worn face, but a faint, quiet strength. He had lost almost everything, but he had gained something far more important: the proof that truth could survive, even when surrounded by lies. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that those who once doubted him would never forget what they had seen that day. The moment when the search team went silent, when their disbelief turned to shock, and when the truth finally spoke louder than the lies.